Hey, how's it going? This is another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob, and what I do here is, of course, talk about some new movies that I've watched. And yeah, isn't that like every other podcast? No, this is a thing where I want to talk about movies that I feel like I've either overlooked or maybe ignored or just never even heard of. And so here's a chance to get those on the watch list, but then check them out and broaden the horizons a little bit. Get out of my comfort zone. And so that's what we're doing. The fun thing has been talking to people about this podcast and what the idea is. And I feel like a lot of people have told me, you know, you're maybe doing some people some favors by watching movies that other people don't have the time to, or maybe wouldn't necessarily go out of their way to find or to even just check out in general, right? I hope that's something that people find useful. If you're listening to this and maybe you've checked out some of the other episodes and maybe heard about some films that you either hadn't heard of before or just never considered, or, you know, maybe you wanted to see a film and I don't know if you have to trust my word on whether it's actually good or not, but I can at least give you a perspective on it and maybe see if there's something to appreciate in there, you know? I don't really like to say that this is like doing reviews. It's a little more of like breaking down what the filmmakers were trying to do and whether they succeeded in some way. Now, of course, I have talked about some films recently that I think, for one reason or another, didn't really work for me. And I try to, at least understand why. But again, it's subjective. You may see a film and think, well, this is the best film. And that's all right. So I wanted to regroup a little bit from some of the other films I've been seeing and some of the rabbit holes I've gone down in terms of the subject matter or genres or whatever. And something that has occurred to me over the last, maybe about the last year or so, as I've been talking to more people about films and about this podcast, but also just regular conversation of what people are watching. I'm really starting to turn a corner on a lot of the streaming services and how much they are, like how much content they're providing, original content, but then also how that is affecting like the prices of these things, For me, there was a big point where I ditched cable, like just regular cable TV, because I think originally it was Netflix. That was kind of the big one, right? The one that really took on digital streaming as a service. And then Hulu, and of course all the others that have come in since then. Sometimes very, very niche, But over the last year, maybe the last couple of years, they've been raising prices on things, huh? And not only raising prices, but also offering some alternative packages or whatever you want to call it that include ads, which it's fine if you want to include ads, but don't make me also pay for it. Like that seems to be like you're getting two bites at the apple, and it just smacks of like greediness, right? Like, why is that really necessary? Like, just charge more and don't include ads. But I get it. They want to get people in at a lower price point. Maybe somebody feels like they can't pay $15 a month, so we'll charge you $10 a month. You just got to sit through these commercials. I don't like the idea of already paying for something, but still being sold detergent or whatever. I've kind of gone back and forth on it, and Netflix, I dropped that a while back because of that. They raised the prices, and then they also started rolling in ads. And so that's a pretty good selection of films and programming in there. But when you want to run ads on it, I just feel like, well, I don't know if it really beats something like a Hulu or Amazon Prime, because you've got even more content on those services, right? So it really depends on the kind of stuff you're looking for. The only one, and I talked to somebody about this recently, the only one streaming service that I've found I have no problem paying either full price for, or that I appreciate they have not tried to roll in or make a plan that includes ads is Criterion Channel. And, I've talked about a lot of films that I've seen on Criterion Channel. I've talked about a lot of them here. And, if you go back to the days of DVDs and Blu-rays, Criterion was the top tier. Even back to the days of Laserdisc, of course. But here with the streaming service, I feel like it's still holding to like really good, really curated content. And yet, look, the price is not cheap. It's probably more expensive than most other services, but I got in on the ground floor, like before they launched, and I don't remember if that gives me like a special rate or something, but I feel like it's always been worth the price. All the years that it's been going. I think it's going on 5 years now. So, if there were a streamer that I would recommend, it would probably be Criterion Channel. Because I feel like it's the most value for the money. And the other side of that, of course, is that stuff like Netflix, stuff like Hulu or whatever, Disney Plus, all of those, it's like, yeah, they have a lot of content, but for whatever reason, I guess it's just worked out this way. It's like I've seen a lot of that content. So it's for those, it's more like, well, I'm paying to have a service that I can just rewatch things I already like. And I don't really know that I need that. I'd really rather pay for something that will give me something new that I haven't seen before or maybe never even heard of. And of course, that totally rolls into why part of why I'm doing this podcast is to look at new stuff, to really understand and explore new work. So, all this leading up to, I got to a point a little while ago, maybe a couple months ago, where I think it was at the beginning of this year or sometime late 2023, where Amazon decided they were going to raise the rate on Amazon Prime, their entire Amazon Prime service, which includes all the shipping and all the other benefits or whatever, but also increase the or add ads to the Prime Video service. So my understanding is that it's any Amazon original movies and series, you get commercials now. And, once that happened, or once that kind of kicked in or went into effect, I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm just not going to watch any Amazon content. I don't want commercials. I already pay for this. You're not going to upsell me on paying for no ads. So I'm just not going to watch original content. I'll watch old stuff or catalog stuff from other studios or whatever else is up there that doesn't have ads. I'll do that. And so I've been doing okay with that for most of this year. But, I did hit a point here recently where I wanted to see a couple of movies that were coming out. And I said, all right, well, you know what? Let me dig into the Amazon original film library and look at what's there. And what have I missed? So, yeah, I watched these films. I had to sit through some commercials. It wasn't as bad as I guess I thought, but still, it just, on principle, it just gets me. I'm sure it probably hits harder when you're watching a series where you've got multiple episodes and every one of those has commercials. With a film, I guess it's not as bad. But let's just get into these films here. Enough about that. I'm off the soapbox now for the time being. First film I wanted to see, which, I remember when this came out and I wanted to really see it back then, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. The Sound of Metal, or not The Sound of Metal, Sound of Metal. I tell you, this is a film that I was really kind of blown away by. And that's on different levels, not even just like the story of it, but also the performances in it and even the filmmaking of it. I can't really gauge how much this film has been out there. Like, I've never heard anybody talk about this film, like just in conversation. And I think it was up for some awards. So I know critically it got some attention. It got some praise, that kind of thing. But, I never really had a sense of like, well, but did it really reach people? And so, look, this is a film about a drummer, a musician who suddenly, just almost abruptly, loses his hearing, like loses like 80% of his hearing. And while you would think for most people that would kind of stop you dead in your tracks, this character of Ruben, played by Riz Ahmed, who, I mean, does some fantastic work in this. And it's not just the idea of playing somebody who's having hearing difficulty, but the levels of emotions and frustrations that he has to show us, it comes across. I mean, there's something to this character and this type, let's say this sort of personality that is not necessarily detoured by something as serious as losing your hearing, when it is like entirely what you do. It is like your identity, right? When he first realizes, hey, something's going on, something's wrong, I think the film plays it in such a realistic and organic way of like, yeah, what would I do if one day I just woke up and my hearing just turned off? Like, how would I actually react to it? For this character, or the film to show this character really going through that kind of tedious process of trying to understand, but then trying to push through it, like seeing a doctor, being told, hey man, your hearing is gone, but still turning around and saying to his girlfriend, Lou, who Olivia Cook here, she's his bandmate, she's a singer and guitarist in their band, and for him to turn around and say, hey, it's okay, we're going back on stage, we got to keep moving, we got a tour, we got an album, we're doing this, we're living this life. It kind of seems stubborn at first, but then I think the film really starts to dig into like, why is this character like this? Because it can seem a little frustrating just as a viewer of like, hey man, just get it together, get with the program, do the thing that's good for you, take care of yourself, right? But when you see like this sort of, I guess, negligence in a way, or ignorance, it's rooted in something. It's rooted in maybe some pain, maybe some old habits, some things that have been left behind. It's kind of haunting, to think like, well, shit, I mean, hearing was the only thing that let him play his music, which was the only thing that let him kind of move forward in life. And without that, where do you go? What do you do? And this story really takes its time with letting us see that, letting us see Ruben sort of unravel. And first, kind of resisting it, like resisting this change in his circumstance, and even refusing help. And when Lou takes him to this place where he can get some help, it's like a support group, but also it's like a community for the deaf. He's like, nah, I'm not with this. I don't really get this. I just want to get back to playing music. But as he kind of comes around to understanding and ultimately like the acceptance of like, hey man, these are the cards you've been dealt now. And this is all you can work with. It's a real interesting turn. It's an amazing arc for a character, I think. And I guess for a person who might really go through this. Because you kind of see like, well, there's a sense of, okay, here's a guy, he's in a band, he's a musician. I mean, I think in his eyes, maybe he kind of feels like, well, he's like the coolest guy in the room. And kind of afraid of being uncool by not being able to hear, not being able to play music, not even being able to communicate. And I think there's even a fear, I don't know if it's a fear necessarily, but there's like a concern over what a life without being able to hear is going to mean for him. When Lou leaves him at this community, and he's kind of on his own now. He's got all these people around him, but he's still of the mind of like, I'm not one of these people. It can feel, I'm sure, like a very solitary existence. I mean, even if you are just a person who is deaf, like living in the world. I mean, and it's a beautiful thing about this film too, is it gets us there. by the end. But in this early part of the film, it's such a foreign concept, I think, to most people. And that's why I really connected with this film, was like seeing this character, and especially, like I said, Riz Ahmed, his performance of showing us this. Like, this character is really struggling. And he's not struggling with it in a melodramatic way. It's in a real kind of reluctant way. Like, he doesn't want to be dealing with this. He'd almost rather just go away. But he can't. It's not how life works, right? So, I don't know. There is something really powerful about this film. And, the other thing is, of course, that the characters that are around him, he's in this group, and everybody there is signing, and he's also interacting with children who are deaf, and he's having to learn how to communicate with them. And I mean, one, because we're introduced to him and Lou in a certain setting and in a certain context, in the city, in a band. It's a real kind of a nomadic lifestyle, and somewhat impulsive and somewhat slapped together. To go from that to this very serene, very calm, and very nurturing kind of environment and people, it's comforting to know like that kind of thing does exist in the world. There are people out there who will have your back and can be a real support system. And this film came out in 2019. In the time since then, maybe a lot more people have really tapped into that, especially because of the pandemic, where a lot of people were just literally on their own, literally locked in their homes by themselves. And, the fear of this virus that could potentially change your life or end your life for some people. I think that dinged a lot of people in the mental health department. You know what I'm saying? And maybe it made a lot of people reassess how they address things like that and how they build their support systems. I know it did for me. I'm sure it did for most people. But for the masses, I think it's really become prominent, and it's become a point of how you have to move in today's world is, hey, don't just ignore the things that are troubling you or the things you're having difficulty with. Like, you need to address them, and you need to do it in a healthy way. But meanwhile, I mean, by the end of the film, there's a point where the character who takes him in to this community and kind of helps him through learning how to be deaf, he asks him, if he's had a moment of stillness. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't really understand what that even meant in the scene. And I kind of thought I had an idea of it. And maybe I have had my own sort of experience like that. Maybe we've all kind of hit that point in different times in our lives. But for this character, I felt like, how would that look? And so by the end of the film, we get that moment. And I tell you, it really struck me. I mean, because it's a thing that until you experience it, it's hard to put into words. It's hard to really describe. And in the case of this character and this story, it's actually easy to convey on film. And I found like that was a really powerful moment, I mean, the fact that it's like the last scene of the film, I think it really drives the whole point home. It's such a well done, well executed, and thoughtful film. It's very respectful of the deaf community and the struggle that someone might have of, maybe not like having always lived deaf, but having gone from having hearing to not having hearing, and what that can look like, what that can feel like. So that's a winner in my book, I think. That's one that I actually want to sit down and watch again at some point. The next film I saw here, Black Box. It's from 2020. This one is a little more of a, I don't know, I guess it's sort of a horror movie, but it's really not. It's kind of a thriller, a little bit of like a psychological thriller. It seems like, we have some elements of like supernatural stuff going on. But as we get into the story, we're following this character as a man who's got some things going on. He seems kind of confused. He's got a daughter, but he recently lost his wife, and he's struggling with amnesia. That's like the setup, right? So, but he's like seeing things, and he's having visions of someone. What am I trying to say here? He basically feels like somebody's after him. And there's a lot of that where I think as you're watching the film, like, I don't even get like what the hell's really going on. Like, this character seems like he's confused and nothing's really getting explained entirely. So it kind of makes me confused. The best you could say is like, oh, we're here's someone who's had like a traumatic brain injury or the things that are kind of spoken about, but we don't really get details. The idea is like, he's just looking for help. He's looking for a little bit of a way out of this weird place that he's in mentally. So he tries this hypnotism therapy, something like this, some kind of experimental thing. And here's where we kind of start to leave the supernatural stuff behind, because it turns out it's not supernatural. We kind of move over into the sci-fi column. And here, at this point, this is probably, I don't know, about a third or halfway into the movie where I realize, wait a minute, what are we watching here? And when this scientist or doctor who is helping him gives him this treatment, kind of puts him under and helps him understand the visions he's having, we start to see, or he starts to piece it together of like, hey, wait a minute. I think this life that I'm living with my daughter and my lost wife, I think this is somebody else's life. Look, I just say this. It rides the line on how much of a reveal or how much of a twist it's trying to throw at you. Because it does do it, right? There is a pretty big reveal on this guy finding out who he really is, and he's not who he thought he was. And then on top of that, there's an even deeper, like darker reveal of like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, this guy is not only not the guy that he thought he was, but he's also a bad guy. Whoa. And not like a bad guy, like evil, but like it's like we start to see, oh, there was like a domestic violence situation happening in his previous life. And that's where I felt like, okay, now the film takes a turn into something that's a little more grounded, actually, because it's not so fantastic, Like, I think a film that really actually pulled this off surprisingly well, and I didn't see it coming, was I guess the remake of The Invisible Man. It was like a few years back now with Elizabeth Moss, right? Where it is about a character who, one, believes there's an invisible man like after her, stalking her or whatever, but then also turns out, oh, that invisible man is actually her ex-husband or whatever, that is a total abusive asshole and is preying on her with his invisibility suit. That's where it like tapped into something that, oh, wait. People can understand that. They can't necessarily understand some fictional science or magic or whatever. Here it's like, oh, no. Here's a guy that's just really in a bad way. So, this one kind of does a similar thing. I don't know if it really lands it entirely, because I feel like it starts to pull back from that at some point. Because this guy, the main character, he's really just trying to get down to the bottom of this and like reconcile, like, wait, why am I living this life, but I'm actually in somebody else's life? And he's trying to like sort this stuff out. And I mean, there is a kind of a redemptive, heroic moment towards the end. I don't know if I really want to say too much about it, because I feel like this is a film you might want to see. It's actually got some really good stuff going on in it. It's got some good performances, I think. And like I said, it's got a couple of really interesting reveals and the way that they're pulled off. But I feel like it stopped just short of like really having having an impact like I was hoping for, you know. I got the idea, but I felt like I wanted it to go like 5% more, you know. So look, let me get to a couple others here that are more recent, actually very recent. These are, and I'll just say right now, like I wasn't really feeling them. One of them was the Roadhouse remake, and you know, I talked about the original Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze. I talked about that in an episode last year, I think, and you know, the context at that point, because I had seen Roadhouse, of course. I saw it when it came out. That was the whole point, is I talked about it because it was a movie that I saw with my mom in the theater. And I would have been, at that time, maybe like 12 years old. And boy, was that a surprise. Because that is not a film you take a 12-year-old to, right? But it's always stuck with me. I mean, just because it has a certain kind of, I don't know, it's got like an earnestness to it, but it's also kind of got this little badass edge to it. For whatever reason, I just feel like it's a movie they wouldn't make today. For good and bad reasons, I suppose. But like they wouldn't make that movie today. This remake with Jake Gyllenhaal and who else is in it? Conor McGregor. Man, I just don't know. I felt like it had no real bite to it, you know? It just didn't have that attitude, that kind of swagger of the original film. You know, I felt like I like Jake Gyllenhaal in a lot of films, but in this one, I felt like he was kind of like in two different films, and neither one of them were Roadhouse. Because it's like, there was this weird dynamic, this mix of energy going on. It was like sometimes a comedy, sometimes like a just all out action film. But then there was also this sort of like, I don't know, dramatic like backstory to it. And like, I never saw Dalton as a killer, right? And it's not like he like goes and kills everybody in the film, but it starts to feel that way for a minute, where it's like, okay, you guys messed with the wrong guy, and now things have gone too far, and now I just got to start killing you. Like that, you know, that, look, for better or worse, I think the Dalton that we got in the original film, and I think a lot of it has to do with Patrick Swayze, right? Is like, he had that sort of mix of being earnest and being like an honorable kind of character, but also being like quietly being a badass. But he had like a grace, but he also had like a power. I don't know. It's like a real interesting dynamic. And look, it wasn't in all his films. I can only really say that it really worked entirely in Point Break and Roadhouse. And those two characters are different from each other. But at the same time, it works for those stories and it works for the dynamic, like the characters around them. And in this film, I just don't know. I just felt like I'm watching like two or three different characters behind Jake Gyllenhaal's eyes. Like there's the guy that he was, which was the fighter who kind of got out of hand. And I think he killed another fighter or killed his friend or whatever it was. And then there's the guy who like rolls into town, who's kind of maybe looking for a new life. I'm not really sure like why he kind of comes in. I mean, I guess he's recruited just like in the original film, but then also like the guy who's like, all right, I'm down to fight. Let's go. And just starts killing people. I was like, wait, who are we watching here? And honestly, I think overall, like just the general feel of the film is like this film is too complicated. It's too complicated. You know, the entire premise of this film or the original film, there's this place, a lot of people are causing trouble. A guy comes in from out of town, cleans the place up, has to deal with some criminal elements, and then is on his way. You know? I mean, that's kind of the gist of it. There's a lot of little dressing that goes on along with that, but there's not much else to it. This film, I mean, we've got a bad guy who's not actually the bad guy because there's a badder guy. But then they call in a badder guy. And he comes in to wreck shop. But also he looks like a clown. I mean, look, I don't know much about like MMA or whatever. But I guess my understanding is that Conor McGregor, he's like a big deal. I don't know. He punches people good, I guess. But definitely 100% not an actor. I'm sorry. I mean, he's hamming it up so much in this and not in a good and a funny and a clever way. It's just bad. And I feel like there was so much nuance you could do with a character like that. And yet this is just so over the top. It's so like mustache twirling. But it was a turnoff. Like I just didn't care about that character. And look, I'm not saying the original Roadhouse did it right. It just did something different. It's like, we don't really know much about that character in the original film. He's just like the pit bull that Ben Gazzara drags in to beat on Patrick Swayze, right? We don't really know a lot about that character other than possibly homosexual. I'm just going to say, because he says I like to fuck like do like you in prison, you know. I'm just saying. But otherwise, not a lot to it. And I think that's the trick here is with this film, or at least with the original, simple is better. And this one is too complicated. You got too many characters behind those characters, too many plot threads going on, too many motivations for all these different characters, too many settings. It's just too much. Look, I'll put it this way to you. You can boil it down to this if you want. The music, right? It's a Roadhouse. There's music in the film. The music in the original film, mostly by the Jeff Healey Band, some other stuff in there too. You got Otis Redding, you got Bob Seger, you got some other tracks in the film, right? In this film, I don't know what this music is. It is so like generic stock country rock blues. I don't even know. Not even. Some of it's like kind of like pop-ish sounded. What is this music? You know? And look, it's no, I guess, disrespect to the musicians or the artists involved. I don't know if this is real bands or it's just like something made up, but it's not on the level of what you got in the original film. This just feels like a lot of playing around. I can't really recommend this. I would always almost entirely recommend the original to see, not only because of the type of film it is and like how it was done, but also like it's kind of frozen in time. Like I said, you wouldn't get a movie like that today. And we have our proof. So the other film I saw here, which, I wasn't really sure I even wanted to see this necessarily, but I looked at some of the people involved and I said, all right, I'll give this a shot. Ricky Stenicki. I go back to the days of the Farrelly brothers and their comedies, Dumb and Dumber, There's Something About Mary, the Kingpin, even something like Stuck on You, or did they do Shallow Hal? You know, those films, you could tell, like, that's when it started to kind of taper off. You know, it wasn't really hitting. But some of those movies, like, they really do kind of, they land. They work. And sometimes they're crude. Sometimes they're weird. But they work. I mean, it's hard to deny it. And here, this is by one of the Farrelly brothers. I think it's Peter Farrelly. You've got an interesting cast here. You've got Zac Efron, who, I don't know from like all the earlier films, like, it's like High School Musical or something like that. I don't know him from any of that, but I know him from like Neighbors and a couple of other films as he's gone on in his career. So I feel like he's got the chops to do some comedy and some drama stuff. And you've got Jermaine Fowler, you've got Andrew Santino, who, I mean, I like in terms of their comedic presence and their timing, their own specific wit is like, it works in general. And in this film, I feel like it works. You've got John Cena here, though, who I still don't know how I feel about John Cena. I can't tell if he's like good or bad good. And I feel like it's the former. I feel like he is actually a great actor who dives so deep into characters and commits so hard to the bit that it comes off looking foolish as hell. Or, I mean, it's just something that nobody else, he just steals the scene. And in this film, that is primarily what is happening. I mean, he is the fictional Ricky Stenicki that these three friends make up as their excuse for why they just go and do guy shit. And when they have to kind of prove, like, hey, this is a real guy, even though he's not, John Cena flies in as Ricky Stenicki to, like, steal the show. And it's an interesting premise, kind of like one of those things like you wouldn't make this movie anymore either. Like, this is a comedy that would have really worked maybe about 15 years ago. And it kind of comes off. Some of it kind of works. You know, I'll say this. There's a lot of stuff in this film that is like, is over the line, right? Like, this is a hard R film, I think. And look, it's Peter Farrelly. I wouldn't expect anything less. I mean, like I said, all those other films, it's kind of where they go. And this one, it's got just enough of the same weird things and the weird characters and, you know, things that you wouldn't see in a regular comedy, put it that way. And subject matter and gags that you just wouldn't find in most other comedies. And John Cena, for all he's doing in this film, I just feel like the one who really, really steals the show is William H. Macy. And it's because of one gag. You know, that's the thing. Like, I give this to the Farrelly brothers. They've done things in their movies that they kind of stick somehow, like beyond the movie. Any of those other films that I mentioned, there are moments in those, there are scenes, there are just visual gags in those things that will stand the test of time. You think about There's Something About Mary, you think about the hair gel or the zipper. If you've seen those films, you know what I'm talking about. You think about Dumb and Dumber, you think about the toilet scene, you think about the most annoying noise in the world, right? Those things live on outside of the film. And I wasn't sure if this film was going to have something like that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. This one, I'm going to nominate right here. Maybe I'm the first. I'm going to nominate air dicking as the thing that lives on beyond this film. Now, of course, that means I think this film has to be successful. Enough people have to see it for it to catch on. But I would say that's the thing that that scene, that whole gag, when that goes down with William H. Macy, and it's kind of hit on a few times during the film, that I can't even describe it. You have to see the film to at least understand what this is. But it works so well, and William H. Macy commits so hard to it. I would say, look, if there's anything about this film that really works, that lands as, I mean, that is a moment that had me entirely laughing. It didn't happen a lot in this film, I gotta say. I thought some of it was amusing and humorous, but it wasn't a lot of laughs, really. But air dicking certainly got me. It definitely got me. Because the way it's kind of talked around, or the characters as they realize what is happening, there's just something about the way it's played. Chef's kiss, you know? So, look, I watched these films. These are all on Amazon Prime Video. And like I said, they're kind of, look, this selection is all over the board. I didn't really try to stick to one specific genre or whatever, but I just wanted to see what Amazon is doing for their original films. And is it worth having ads on top of what I already pay? And I feel like Sound of Metal, yes, worth it. I think that's an excellent film. If we want to talk about Roadhouse or Ricky Stenicki, maybe not. Probably not. Black Box, I feel like it's got some cool things in there, some interesting ideas. Like I said, I don't know if it really went far enough. But, you know, and if we're looking at that in chronological order, I mean, we're talking about over the course of 5 years, the quality of these films seems to be going downward. Now, maybe I'm watching the wrong ones. Maybe I need to watch some different ones, which I will do. But in the meantime, like, this is where we're at, I think. And I feel like you're not justifying the costs. You're giving me worse films for more money. Come on, man. Something's not adding up, you know? So, anyway. Hey, look, that's been it for now. If you want to hear some other episodes, check out some other films, filmstreak.com. That's where you go. Okay. Now you can also subscribe. You can sign up to get new episodes by email. Also, you can get the list. I keep all of these films in order on IMDb. I have a list there, so you can add them to your list. You can rate them. You can see if they're available to watch on whatever streamers, maybe Amazon Prime Video, of course, because these 4 are all there. But otherwise, you know what to do. Go watch something new.